Welcome to the Impact in Charlotte podcast, where we believe you need to show up to go up, grow yourself to grow your business and your community. In each episode, we highlight a member of II Charlotte, share their story, and talk impact. Today's guest is Justin Agans. Justin is a startup lawyer here in town with Spengler and Agans law firm. Welcome, Justin. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Dave. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So it's been an interesting, 2020 as we creep into 2021. A lot of folks are talking about the plans that they're making. You're an entrepreneur. You've got things going on. What for you led you into the entrepreneurial journey, and where do you see it going as we enter into the new year?
Sure. So as a lawyer who works with startups and small to medium-sized businesses, I am both an entrepreneur myself, and then my primary job is to support entrepreneurs. So I got into to this type of law because I got to work in a clinic when I was still in law school that offered free entrepreneurial law services to local small businesses and startups. And I wasn't sure that I was going to practice law at that point in time. I was getting a joint degree with law and business and thought I would focus on the business side. But as I got to work with local startups and entrepreneurs, I really loved it. I loved the energy that they brought, and I loved being able to walk down the street and walk into a restaurant where I had helped a business owner, negotiate a lease or hire a great new front of house manager, and you get to see your impact in the community in a way that really allowed me to enjoy the efforts and to see that the real impact. I play just a very small role, but it is pretty incredible to play even just a small role in your local businesses and local community efforts. And so that's why I started doing it, and it's why I continue to enjoy it to this day. And the pandemic in 2020 and as we're rolling into 2021, many things have changed, but one of them that hasn't is the fact that I still get to do that. Unfortunately, these days I'm also helping a lot of people in difficult situations, figuring out how to weather the storm, and so it's not always the start of a dream, but it's more saving a dream. But still important work with the people who are the backbone of the local economy. And so, that's something that, again, I enjoyed, and it's why I got into what I do. And it's still what gets me excited in the morning to come to the office or the garage, as the case may be, and and continue to serve the community in that way.
Yeah. You mentioned a lot of great things in there. One thing you kind of hinted to was, now you're kind of helping people save their dream. But startups is a lot of this kind of big idea, hey, this is a thing I want to build. Talk a little bit about the energy that you see here in Charlotte around kind of the entrepreneurial community. You talked about impact, you talked about being able to get people started. Kind of as a person who serves lots of different startups, what do you see happening in Charlotte these days? Like what's some of that kind of excitement and the dreams that you're seeing?
Sure. So, like many growing communities, Charlotte's one of the fastest growing major metro areas in the U.S. We have seen, I moved here in 2012, and in the last 8+ years, I've seen Charlotte, grow from a startup ecosystem that was in its infancy into something that's maturing more. So you're seeing a lot more people starting businesses, starting to see some expertise develop in various verticals like fintech, what Charlotte's probably best known for, but we also have a couple of robust healthcare systems. So healthcare startups are also a growing field. And then just also seeing the community itself being more supportive and more experienced, which is great for the people who are brand new to the game. And you see different sorts of events like Pitch Breakfast is an event that I'm involved with that allows people to practice their pitches in front of actual startup investors, and then groups like II Charlotte, of which we're a part, where you've got experienced business leaders who get together and talk through some of the challenges they're facing. And there's just, at this point now, just a much more robust community where we can help each other because we've been through those sorts of the sorts of challenges that our colleagues are facing, and there's more of an effort to do that sort of work together, and to leverage each other's maybe mistakes in some cases and also successes in others to try to shorten the learning curve for those of us who are still in growth mode. And I'm an entrepreneur and somebody who helps entrepreneurs, and so I get to live on both sides of that, which is nice. But I'd say that the community in Charlotte really has matured quite a bit since I first moved here 8+ years ago.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, you talk about it kind of like a toddler, right? Like it's a thing that's kind of moving. Now we're kind of entering maybe the awkward puberty stage where we're kind of turning into like a community, ecosystem of entrepreneurs. What you talked about, kind of helping people start their dream. When entrepreneurs come to you, I'm sure you see kind of all sorts of different needs, issues, challenges, ways to support. But what are some things that entrepreneurs need to be thinking of, when it comes to chasing their dream? What are, from kind of the law perspective, like what are some of the common things that you see that it's like, hey, if you could do some of these things, it can set you up, to be successful? Or what are some of the things that they might not see that they come to you with?
Yeah, so there's quite a few things that come in the door, but some common issues that come up are mostly related to multiple people that are starting a business together and making sure that not only are people on the same page, but that there's some legal protections around that. Who makes what types of decisions? What decisions rise to the level that everybody that's involved needs to vote on it? Voting standards, so majority versus unanimous in some cases. But really making sure that you've got decision-making structures set up so that people are coming into a relationship eyes wide open. And if things don't work out, that you've got an exit plan that isn't going to blow the business. Because even though we do see a pretty good success rate in terms of businesses, one of the most common ways that businesses fail is actually not about business model or a lack of customers or things of that nature. It's that the internal team can't get along, and a lot of times it's because they haven't had the hard conversations when they're forming the company. And so in many cases, what I do is serve to facilitate hard conversations, to make sure that people are on the same page, and that people understand what the relative commitments that they're making to each other and to the business are. And at that point, at least we've done the best that we can to frame it up. And that's not a perfect solution, of course. The rubber meets the road when people are launching and growing the business, but really just making sure that people are communicating and then discussing the important issues that build the foundation for the business.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really important point, right? Like the foundations of a company culture get formed minute one in many ways, right? So
Yep.
What I heard in that is that you're ultimately kind of a business therapist sometimes as well. Like, as an organizational development type person, I share that seat. So that's really great. We talk a lot about kind of what shows up on in businesses. There's just a lot of things to know. There's a lot of challenges that you face, especially as an entrepreneur, as you're building a business or as you're supporting businesses. Talk a little bit about kind of what how a community or business communities kind of helped support you as you've been able to kind of continue to grow your entrepreneurial endeavors.
Sure. Yeah. So, like many entrepreneurs, I spent the first few years really just going it alone and, doing the best that I could, and working hard, but sort of starting from scratch and not really relying on community. In the last couple of years, I've started to connect with other business owners, because, as is probably not surprising to most people, even, lawyers versus dentists versus leadership consultants, we have different sort of, the work that we're doing is different, but the business challenges that we face are often the same or at least analogous. And so Charlotte's been a big part of that for me, dealing with other business owners and people that are launching and growing businesses, in particular in the growth mode phase, where you deal with things like, how do you grow strategically? How do you make sure that the actions that you're taking tomorrow are going to get you to the goals that you've set for a year from now? And not just that, but just, how do you make sure that the messaging that you're doing is in alignment with those goals, and just making sure that everything fits together. And then also it can be simple tactical things like um, how do you, if your team needs to shrink rather than grow, how do you handle that? And how do you do that intelligently, that in a way that's compassionate to an employee and what's best for the business? But being able to have a community like II Charlotte, where you can have those open and honest conversations, um, and deal with other people who are, responsible for the livelihoods of others. It's not theory, it's real practice, and knowing that there are other people that are going through the same sorts of scenarios that you are as a business owner is a really powerful, comfort, and then resource too. So it's nice to know that you're not alone. There's an emotional element to that, but it's also, calling up a friend and saying, hey, here's the issue I'm dealing with. I remember you mentioning this, something similar 3 or 4 months ago. Can you run me back through how you went about that? Here's what I'm dealing with. What are the ways that that's the same and different from what you went through, and help you sort of think about how you can then apply it to your own business. But the community element of that, I mean, you just can't. There aren't words that can express how valuable that is, both in terms of making smart tactical decisions, but also the peace of mind of knowing you're not alone, and being able to sleep a little bit better at night, knowing that you've got a community of people around you that support you.
Yeah, that's really great. I mean, you mentioned a lot of important pieces in there. One thing that really struck me, or that I think is just a good nugget, right? Of when you get into a business community, it's not so much theory as it is just like, hey, I've been through this, right? Like a lot of things that you face as an entrepreneur are new experiences, or things you've never seen, or all of a sudden the situation shows up and it's like, man, I don't know what to do about this thing, right? Being able to ask somebody who's been through it and learn from it, to be able to, learn from their experiences, is a really good way to go about it. So kind of coupled with that, what is either, some of the best advice that you've received, and or, because you're a startup lawyer and you get to give advice all day, what's some of the best advice that you've given that's really landed? So your choice.
Yeah. So it's interesting I think the best piece of advice that I received it and I've given it, is you have to do the work. So people oftentimes will get bogged down in redoing their strategic plan over and over and over, and spending tons of time thinking about and planning. And that is certainly an important element to make sure that the work that you do is directed at the right objectives. But there's no replacing actually getting your hands dirty and like working on building the business and doing the work that's associated with that. And there's a phrase, paralysis by analysis, that gets thrown around sometimes, or variations thereof. And I think it's important to actually make sure that you're spending your time on building the business and or building a product, or refining your services, and not just on the idea of it. And there's a meaningful distinction there. And it's advice that I received, and I appreciated the significance of it much later than I received it. And I try to pass that along also to people who are, especially in launch, as a startup lawyer. I work with more mature businesses, but when I'm working with people who are thinking about starting a business and the concept is just an idea, I tell them to focus as much of their attention on actually building the business itself, or if they're a software engineer, building the product as possible, and to not get lost on the what ifs and the fun dreaming as much as the doing.
Yeah, that's really good. So earlier you mentioned culture. You talked about culture in terms of like being able to articulate and have some of those difficult conversations on the front end. How, as an entrepreneur, have you seen culture kind of play out in your own teams, right? So like not necessarily just some of those first conversations and how you set up, but how do those conversations kind of play throughout?
Yeah. So I would say there's a tough transition as you grow a business from uh, having everybody that's a part of the team involved in every decision. Um, and you can pretty quickly, as your business grows, get to a point where that is just impractical and you'd be doing no work. You'd only be discussing various value choices. Um, and coming to a point within the business and setting that as a part of the firm value or firm values in the event of a law firm or company culture for businesses more generally is, I think, understanding who's responsible for what and being willing to have to give autonomy within certain subject areas to people within the company and trusting them and living with decisions that are different than your own or that you would have made in your own capacity. So I'll often talk about, like my partner, for instance, will ask me, hey, what's your opinion on this particular thing that we're deciding? And 90% of the time I will say, here's my opinion because you asked for it, but I do not feel strongly about this at all. And the benefit of that transparency and that clarity is that when I tell him that I really do care about something and that it matters to me and I feel strongly about it, then 9 times out of 10 or 99 times out of 100, he understands that it's important to me. And if he doesn't feel as strongly, then he will cede that decision to me. And I do my best to do the same for him. And so, that I think comes back to being honest and transparent and clear. And, that's, at least for my company, that's one of the most important things that we do. And from a culture standpoint, not being able or not being afraid to just be clear about what's important and what's not. And then the trust of allowing other people to make decisions when it's something that's within their sphere.
Yeah. I really appreciate that example, in particular around decision making, right? Like, I think a lot of, like, there's so many decisions to make in any business on any given day, right? Like, how many decisions do you make in a day?
Mm-hmm.
Hundreds, right? And not having a process or not having a determined culture around that can create a lot of friction points. So I really love that example. We're kind of coming close to the end of our time here. And so you have the final 30 seconds. You can pitch your business. You can talk about, your feelings on 2021, whatever you want to talk about. You've got 30 seconds. The floor is yours.
Sure. I'll close by just reiterating the point that being an entrepreneur and a business owner can be a lonely endeavor. And I would encourage everybody to find their tribe or their community where they can have even just a couple other people that they can have real and honest conversations with to make sure that you're not suffering in silence and that the people around you, building up a community or a tribe where you've got that support and you've got people that are in your corner to listen, to provide advice, or to just have coffee or beer with and talk about the game last night if that's what you need. But it's important to have other people. As humans, we are social creatures, and doesn't matter whether it's 2 people or whether it's 20 people. Find a group that you can trust. And that you can be there for the other members of that group, and then those other members can be there for you as well.
That's great. Thanks, Justin. I really appreciate it. Thanks to our guest, Justin Agans, today, as he shared some really great nuggets with us, talking about having the difficult conversations, being able to build trust, find, don't be an entrepreneur alone. Really appreciate some of those great insights. So thanks, Justin, for that. Thank you for listening to the Impact in Charlotte podcast, where we believe you need to show up to grow yourself, to grow your business, and your. Want to learn more about II Charlotte, you can visit iicharlotte.com. And remember, impact begins with II. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.